Secret friends, unite!
Welcome to the Secret Friends Unite podcast. This is a very special episode. We are joined by one of my favorite authors of all time, Raymond E. Feist. Raymond, thank you for joining.
My pleasure.
I reached out to you because I feel like I started finding your works in the wrong way. I played a game back in 1994, Trail at Krondor.
I know it well. My name's on the box.
Exactly. And I had no clue about you as a writer, but my friend said, hey, you have to play this game. It's fantastic. The characters are awesome. The story, the music, everything is fantastic, and you'll love it. And I'm like, okay. I've not really been into PC RPGs. Back in the day, there was just, you didn't have voice dialogue, really. You had things came on floppy disks. You really had to, you had floppy disks.
My first game was called Adventure, and it was on the ChemLab computer at UCSD. And, 2 o'clock in the morning when you could steal some login time, you go play it. Adventure was so old that when you got to the end of the game, if you actually could win it, because it was a classic text-only adventure game, you got to the secret door. When you opened the secret door, you found the magic password, Zork.
Oh, yes.
And Zork was the password into the second game that supposedly nobody knew about, which actually was what those people, was the first game I'm aware of that actually got merchandised. They took it out of the university environment and they started selling it online. And not even online. I mean, there was no online. This is before the World Wide Web. But you could order it and you get the 22 5.5-inch floppies, and then, oh God, we were so hip when we went to Flexies. 3.5.
Oh, it's amazing. That 1 megabyte of data that gave you so much interaction.
Outboard hard drive I ever saw was my friend Janie Wordsey, my collaborator on the Empire series, got and I'm going to remember the name of it, the drive, but it was an outboard drive for the Apple II. And it was like, it has 20K of additional memory.
Wow.
Who's ever going to use that much memory?
I Commodore 128 was my first computer, and that 128K. So, yeah.
Actually, my first was an Apple IIc.
Okay.
I wrote Magician, and I got halfway through Silverthorne on typewriters.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's awesome. But going back to Betrayal at Krondor, that was, like I said, I went the opposite way. It drove me to find out more about this universe, and that's where I started reading your books, and started with Magician, and it was interesting because Magician was split into two for some reason. What was the rationale for being split in two?
Oh, it's simply a business thing. Now we're getting to some real in the weeds about publishing in the 80s, and I'll try to keep it really short. The short answer was when Bantam bought the paperback rights from Doubleday. This is back way before the hard-soft deal was a common thing. So he sold to a hardcover publisher, and they turned around and they found a paperback publisher. So Doubleday and Bantam went into a deal, and then later they merged. So suddenly I was back with one company. But at that time, Lou Veronica, who was the publisher at Bantam, said to me, well, we're going to split it in half. And I went, okay, why? He said, I won't publish a bestseller size paperback unless it's a bestseller. Little did he suspect. And so splitting books into smaller bits is very common in Asia. And you find it a lot in Eastern Europe and in some parts of Western Europe. But in Britain, for example, it's always been one novel. That's just Magician. You go into Waterson's or Dimmick's or any of the bookstores that are still in business, and it's one volume. But it worked out okay. So my third book hit the New York Times bestseller list, so I never had that conversation again with Lou about the size of a book. And then, it's one of those deals where you are in this business long enough and you understand that it's a constantly evolving thing. I have a degree in marketing, by the way.
Oh, fantastic.
I was a salesman for 7 years in my ill-spent youth while I was grinding my way through college. My father had passed, and I couldn't afford to go, so I had to go get jobs and things on again, off again. I finally got my degree 14 years after I was a freshman.
Wow.
Yeah, so I started in 63, fall of 63, and I graduated in 77. But it's life, It's like John Lennon so brilliantly put, life is what happens while you're making other plans.
Oh, I totally know what you mean. I have a nursing degree, and I work in logistics for General Mills, so it's a very strange journey to take. I went to the Air Force, saw the world, and met my wife. So there you go. It's kind of crazy. So thinking about all of this, I just wanted to give a little bit of background. I mean, this is a quick introduction, but you started in '82 is when Magician was first published.
Started writing it late 77, on again, off again. Got serious about it when I lost my job. There was a tax revolt here in San Diego called Prop 13. I lost funding for a nonprofit I was working for at the time. Suddenly I had nothing to do but write. I'll tell you, when you're broke, especially back then, and there wasn't any online, writing was a great way to kill the day. I'd set up my resumes and mail them out. I'd call a few people to set appointments for interviews. And then I set my butt down and write. And suddenly it was 5 o'clock. Oh, time for a beer, and I did 27 pages. Wow, I had no idea what I was doing writing Magician. It was an earn while you learn. And I published on my Facebook page about a year ago, how Magician got written and how the original first chapter in the book ended up going in the drawer and finally got recycled years later as like the 4th or 5th chapter of King's Buccaneer.
Wow.
So
that's amazing.
You never throw anything away. If you go to my web page on Facebook, I've got two. I've got my professional page, which actually HarperCollins started when Magician's End came out. And then my personal page, which I have no idea what I'm doing there except annoying people with politics and debating sports and recruiting people from my World of Warcraft guild and all kinds of silly stuff. And, it's both aspects of social media today. But I think I might have echoed that particular set of things to both sites, so either one. But it's about how I wrote Magician. And the first part's about how I actually wrote it. The second part was how I sold it. And looking back, I kind of went, I'm the luckiest guy I know. I caught every break imaginable in terms of learning how to be a writer. I got a 5-year education in 6 months because of my editor, who asked me, he said, look, this is a huge book. We think it can be bigger. And he sent me a shopping list. Can you add a character in disguise, kind of maybe Aragorn is in Lord of the Rings that we don't know who he is. Fine, Martin Longbow was not in the original Book of Magician. Oh, Pug needs a foil in his thing with Carleen. Boom, Squire Rowland, not within the original draft of Magician. We need to see things that are going on in Cromdo during the time Pug is on Kellowan. Oh, Arutha goes to see the prince. We meet Jimmy the Hand, not in the original draft. I have characters that show up and we'll get off the stage like Jimmy and Nacor. I have characters to say, no, you just think we're going this way. We're going that way. And then my editor said, this is great. This is the book we want. Now cut 50,000 words out of it.
Easier said than done.
I was on the verge of tears, actually, for about an hour after getting that phone call. And long story short, I was so pissed off about it that I actually used 2 different markers. The black markers is stuff that can go. The red markers is stuff that goes over protest. And I put it in the closet. 10 years later, Lou and Monica and I are talking about, I said, keep them on hardcovers, Lou. He said, I'm not going to publish a hardcover of Magician again unless there's new content. I went, oh, wait a minute. I have this manuscript in the closet with 50,000 words that have been cut out of it. He said, okay, we can do that. And frankly, Adrian Zackheim, the original editor, was correct. I put maybe 26,000 words from what I cut out, and then added another 10,000 of sort of connective tissue and improved a little bit here and there. And that's the author's preferred edition that was published 10 years after the original. That's the one that's in print now. Any copy of Magician you get any place is the 92 edition with the extra 40,000 words in it.
I would have never known. That's one I have. That's phenomenal, because writing is like your, my wife said, would be like your baby, and having someone remove that from you, yeah.
Well, writing is rewriting, and the point is like I just went through a thing with my editors on my new book, And the single most frustrating thing for me as a writer is I'm at the copy edit stage now. So I get the manuscript back, and there's a note saying, could we use a little bit more in this description? No. Okay, so I did a line. And I'm looking at it, and I'm going, okay. And an hour later, I'll add a dependent clause to answer the query. It's the single slowest part of the process. Not because I can't type as fast, but simply I sit and stare out the damn window for an hour trying to figure out whether I want to put that extra clause in there. Now, it's the kind of stuff that hopefully the reader only notices in the sense that it fine-tunes the narrative. Yeah. But no, it's as we used to say, ain't all beer and Skittles. By the way, for the younger members of your audience, Skittles was not candy back then.
I did not know that either.
It's a bar game. If you look up, yeah, well, it's you know how you have foosball and you have cushion pool, little pool tables and bar. Yeah. Skittles was a game where you had a top, and it was very popular in Britain. You tie a string around it, pull it through, and then it sort of wanders through this, and it's how many pins you knock over before the top falls over. And it's really a great game when you're just hammered.
Coordination being what it is.
Yeah, well, the fact is you just sit there and watch the top spin. But, it's like my ill-spent youth coming back to haunt me.
Oh, boy. So for the listeners who may not know what the series is about, it's a series that has spanned 30 years. Roughly 30 books. It starts off with I would say, a very, very classic premise of the heroes you don't expect that become something else. But it takes things, alternate paths along the way, which make it really stand out. I jokingly refer to it as the world's longest trilogy, because originally I didn't know there was going to be a second book, let alone 29 after. So when I wrote Magician, I wrote it to be a standalone, but because it was based in a gaming world that I helped create while I was in college, I sort of had the backstory. The first decision I made when I wrote Magician was I wasn't going to write contemporaneously with the game, because the game had a lot of silly stuff in it that, games in the 70s did. This is the paper and pencil Friday nighters, drinking beer, because it's a cheap form of entertainment, mostly graduate students, a couple of undergraduates. I was an older undergraduate, so these guys were more in my age group. And part of the issue was I didn't want to deal with a lot of silly stuff, so I did a historical novel about a place that doesn't exist. It's 500 years before the first. The first riff was 500 years before the game. So I did that, and it allowed me a nice structure of environment that I didn't have to dwell on too much. It created some plot issues when I realized, when I go from here to here, the Duke's got to ride through a range of mountains that are snowed in, or later, Arutha's got to sail through the Straits of Darkness in winter, which is considered suicide. That kind of thing. Added a lot of, it's hard to say verisimilitude about a fantasy world, but it tended to give that feeling of this place is objective. The author isn't making stuff up because it's convenient to the narrative. And it helped me understand a lot about the world building process. So I wrote it, sent it off, still trying to get a job, And then, I got a phone call, and, Adrian Zackheim wanted to buy it. Wow, okay, so now I have a second career, but I'm still trying to get a job. And then I wrote it and did part-time work. I did a lot of substitute work at universities in administration because, I had background there. I'd been the assistant resident dean at John Muir College for a while, and at UC San Diego. And I had done admin work at University of San Diego and did some stuff, in concert with with San Diego State University. So I had some contacts and things. Well, when I sold the second book for livable money, it was a second and third, they did 2-book contract. And I went, okay, this is now more money per book than I would make in a year working as an admin and for entrance level admin. I think I'm a writer. Yeah. And here we are 30 years later, I'm thinking, thank God I'm a writer. It's the best job I've ever had. So what happened is why it became 30 books is, it's a game, right? And if you've ever played paper and pencil, Dungeons and Dragons type FRPs, and that's fantasy role playing for those of you who don't remember before computers,
there's a lot of discussion that takes place. Well, nobody goes there anymore. Why? Well, they just don't know. It's the scary people live there. Well, who are the scary people? Nobody knows. Now, this is just some random thing you're doing over a six-pack, but it sticks. And so when it comes time to write the story, you go, oh, well, yeah, well, John Everson said the scary people live there. I wonder what that's all about. And you start writing it. So there were 5 riff wars. I went, okay. So I got to the end of Magician, and my editor said, okay, so, at the end of Darkness of Sethana, and he was actually, my editor said, okay, so what happens next? And I went, I have no idea. And that's how Prince of the Blood was born. Now, at the same time, 2 other things were going on. I had made the deal to do Fairy Tale, because for God's sake, I wanted a book that wasn't endless Midkemia stories. I wanted to show the world, yeah, I can write other stuff. Also, it was a pretty nifty idea for a book, I thought. And at the same time, I had sort of bullied Janie Wirtz into co-writing the Empire series for me. Because I wanted to do the other side of the Rift War, but I wanted a female protagonist. The first discussion I ever had with Janie about the book was, okay, I've got a teenage girl in chapter 1 who's the star of the series. Never having been a teenage girl myself, I feel somewhat disadvantaged in being persuasive. So I drew the outlines for Mara of the Acoma, and Janie colored her in brilliantly. There were things that Janie would say to me. I'd say, well, I want to go here and do this, but I don't know how I'm going to get her there. I want her to run a con, because I didn't want, a guy in drag. I didn't want a chick in chainmail. I didn't want any of the traditional, at that time, male-created female heroines, there were very few. I think Ellen Expansion had Tenzin Liaison, I think was, I may confusing my authors and my characters, but there were very few, persuasive female protagonists in science fiction and fantasy at the time who were written by men. And that's a legacy of the Don Draper era. That's the 50s and 60s and 70s, early 70s. And then there, were some strong characters. But I like to think that I helped. I like to think that, Mara of the Acoma is a benchmark character, because she isn't a chick in chainmail. She isn't a guy in drag. And she's also not doing anything except to protect the people she loves. Every single thing she does in that trilogy. Janie was just incredibly instructive. I couldn't have written Miranda or Sandrina in later books, for instance, if I hadn't done Mara with Janie. And so I have a plate full is what I'm getting to, and I thought, okay, and then we'll do The King's Buccaneer, and then I'm out of contract. And so I had a sequel in mind for The King's Buccaneer called Return of the Buccaneer. But by that time, my original editor, Adrian Zakon, had moved over to Morrow. And so my agent called me and said, well, Adrian wants you to follow Morrow. And I said, well, see how much money Bannon is willing to pay to keep me here, and then see how much, and there was no contest. And there's an old axiom in publishing, sometimes the people who make you a star don't see you as a star. They keep remembering back to when you first broke in. So I went to Morrow. And I said, well, I got this idea for a book called, The Return of the Buccaneer. And Adrian said, no, we are not doing a sequel to another company's title. Now, if I had been able to have a crystal ball and say to him, Adrian, these books are never going out of print, maybe. But a lot of the material in the The Return of the Buccaneer is sort of backstory for Shadow of a Dark Queen, the first book I did at Morrow. It's odd, through mergers and acquisition now, I am with one company worldwide, and that's HarperCollins. And except for the first 8 titles in the United States, Harper publishes me worldwide in English. I'm also their senior writer. There is nobody they've got writing for them now who's been with them longer. There are some books that were published before mine were publishing, but those writers are no longer in the business. And so I've got 30 years of books that have never gone out of print, which is my single biggest point of pride. I was asked that not too long ago. What are you most proud of? And I thought, because, a lot of writers will say, well, I struck a blow for freedom, or I embarrassed the king, but an emperor who didn't have any clothes on, or, I love my groupies or whatever, And I said, I'm still in print. I've never had a book go out of print in English. And boy, that's saying something in this business.
Yeah, I mean, even in video games, games out for a year ceases to
Yeah,
be
so the
printed.
reason I went to Magician's End was I just burned out. I got through all 5 Rift Wars. I love Pug as a character, and people don't understand it that you don't always know exactly who your character is. You, as a narrator, as a writer of narrative, if you're doing it correctly, your characters evolve. They change. 2 books before I wrote, I think it was Kingdom Besieged. If I had said, well, Pug and his son are going to have a falling out, I would have said, why? Well, by the time I got there, I fully understood why. The driving characteristic of Pug of Cry-D is that at the bottom of everything is his absolutely monomaniacal desire to do the right thing, to always be on the side of the angels, no matter what the cost. And at one point, his son Magnus busts his chops and says, Dad, when is the cost too high? When do you say enough is enough? Because he just blew up a planet. He destroyed Kelhawan to stop an interdimensional invasion, which would have unraveled the fabric of reality. So, I also had a lot of fun with those high concept stuff, Well, the gods over here are pissed at the gods over there, and, you're caught in the middle. So that kind of stuff appealed the hell out of me, but I got tired of it. And I said, dude, you're going to be running McKeemian books until they carry you out on a stretcher if you don't stop now. Well, it was 5 Rift Wars in the narrative, 5 Rift Wars over the bottles of beer back in the 70s. I said, fine, we'll go to the end of the 5 Rift Wars and say goodbye to Pug.
Wow.
And I had people tell me they haven't read the book. They won't read the book. And he said, why? I said, I don't want to say goodbye to Pug. I said, well, if you're worried about it, what you can do is as soon as you finish Magician's End, you can go back and start Magician again, and there's Pug, and he's doing fine.
My wife is the same way with the TV show. She doesn't want to watch the finale because she wants to feel like it continues.
There's an evil trap for Supernatural fans, if you happen to like that TV show.
I love this series.
It's just, as a fantasy writer, I am in awe of the stuff they get away with. Let's see, how many times did they kill Dean and brought him back? Is it 3 or 4?
Oh, it's ongoing.
Yeah, and the self-parody is brilliant. The couple of self-referencing shows they've done, the one where they go to Hollywood, but they're actually shooting on the back lot up in Vancouver, and I think it's Samuel says, gee, he's Californian, he expected to be warmer down here, and Dean says, yeah, it's positively Canadian.
Yeah, it's like the series of books written about them, and the musical episode, all of those things that are just breaking the fourth wall.
And God is a hack writer.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah. So, long story short, it's TNT has like 4 episodes a day on, and when they get to the last episode of the last season that they have under license, they go back to the pilot.
Start again.
So it's this endless repetition, and so it's like you go, okay, they have been doing this for 12 years. Just look how babyface Jared Padalecki is in the pilot. These guys were young when they started.
Oh,
but
definitely.
I'm getting a little off track. My point being that they're always sort of fixed in amber. They're there. They're always there. You want to read about Jimmy? You got the Jimmy the Hand books. You've got Crondor the Betrayal and Crondor the Assassins and Return to Crondor and Jimmy the Crawler. You can go back to Magician when we introduced Jimmy. These characters never go away. They're always there. And I tell people, I'm never saying never. I have no plans to go back to McKeemian at the moment, but I might. Because immediately I'm getting fan mail when I said I'm doing King of Ashes and I'm starting a series. People going, but what about Magnus? What about Philip? His freshly found apprentice. I'm like, well, you go for a little symmetry there. You go through a little tip of the hat to Jim Rigby's Wheel of Time concept, and you end up back where you started in Cry-D. And people don't want to let go. I should be gratified, and I am. I really have enthusiastic fans. And the best part of it is most of them are grown-ups. I've seen some of Clive Barker's fans. I've seen some of Anne Rice's fans. They're scary people.
Oh,
Some
yes.
Of them. Most of them are lovely.
Yeah, I what I loved about the books, because I did read Fairy Tale in between, and Fairy Tale, I really that's the book I continue to point to my wife. Read this book because I think it was doing things in that fantasy breaking through the reality earlier than a lot of books. I mean, unless you go back to like what was that movie? Troll or some bad stuff like that. But yours, I just love the fact that you had that blending between the worlds, and I said that's the book you should really start reading if you want an entry into your world.
Yeah. Well, Fairy Tale is the first book I did where I really didn't have a character or a big concept going in. And it actually began over 3 seemingly unrelated questions that I had. I'm not entirely sure which came first. I mean, these questions that I had were really separated by time. But the first one that I remember was driving along and hearing Christmas carols one, holiday season. And and somebody was, we 3 kings of Orient are, that whole thing. Carrying presents from afar, however that lyric goes. And I went, oh yeah, the 3 magi. And someone went, what the hell are magi? Because magi is a term that was used very commonly in role-playing games in the 70s to mean magicians. Mage, magi, and magician were all used interchangeably. Oh, okay. And this was, before the internet, so I happened to be like at the UC San Diego Central Library, which is this gigantic spaceship of a library. If you ever see pictures of it, it's just a gorgeous library. And while I was doing something else, I went, oh yeah, the Magi thing. Let me go look this up. And I got into the whole thing about the Zoroastrians and all the secret society, and related to the Parsis in India, the fire worshippers. And there was one odd thing about them which struck me. When the Seljuk Turks were basically really kicking ass and taking names and expanding Islam. That was the second big wave. It was this was Saladin and the Crusades and all that. One of the tenets in Islam is that you treat the children of the book, the other 2 Abrahamic religions, with respect. So Jews and Christians are to be accepted as worshipers of the one true God. And so, they would go into a city, and say, okay, who do you worship? I worship Dagon. Okay, convert or die. Okay, I'll convert, but if they were a Christian or Jew, there was no mandate to convert you. Okay, fine. And for years, that they all got along pretty well. Except for the Magi. Because there was a tenet and something important. I'm not sure whether it was one of the surahs in the Quran or not, but it was, the Magi's, hands off, leave them alone. No references to why, just don't mess with them. Leave them alone. I was, okay, interesting. As a writer, I can do a lot with that. I have no story. And then there's a common trope in by Celtic lore, Irish. If you read a lot of Irish legend, especially Scottish to a degree, and even Cornish and Welsh, most of those fairy tales, in one way or another, are cautionary in nature. And it leads to a lot of superstitious behavior. So you see a whirlwind, you tip your hat. Why? Because there's a spirit in the whirlwind, and you want to respect him. Otherwise, he's going to mess you up. Okay. And then, maybe, wow, what a novel idea that 25 other writers have had. Fairy tales are all based on reality. They're all, real critters and blah, blah, blah. Okay, fine. Again, no concrete story idea. And then at one point I was thinking about human evolution. I have this really long, boring theory, which I will spare you and your audience, on human behavior. But the short version is, a lot of our problems socially are we have tens of thousands of years of learned genetic improvement, contrary to, what, 4,000 or 5,000 years of civilized behavior, and according to some people, less than 20 minutes worth of civilized behavior. It's like still teaching undergraduate boys to keep their pants on. And for instance, this was something a friend of mine said to me as an undergraduate. He said, a lot of problems between men and women can be explained by understanding our genetics. He was a genetic biologist, actually. And I said, a lovely gentleman named Tim Lassell, who's no longer with us, God rest him. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, if I'm to be biologically successful, I need to go out and get as many girls as pregnant as I can before I get run over by the buffalo stampede. If a girl is to be biologically successful, she has to be really, really fussy about who she has a kid with. And those two things don't go together well. Okay, that kind of makes sense. And a lot of dating behavior and stuff really, and male patriarchal behavior and all that crap, it really relates to the fact that the most powerful guy in the tribe wants the most offspring possible. And the really smart woman wants the guy who's not going to get run over by the buffaloes and is going to come home and feed her and the kid. It also explains the 7-year itch as a way to get the gene pool stirred up and moving around, because at about 7 years, the kid's old enough to help mom in the field with the gleaning and the gathering and whatever else they're doing in a hunting, gathering, scavenging culture, which, we had for, assuming how long you believe humans in our current form existed, 40, 50, 60, 70,000 years, up to maybe 100,000. Well, we've got about maybe 8,000, 9,000 years of recorded history. So my question was, well, what the hell were we doing for the previous 75,000 years? That's a lot of time to be hunting and gathering, And the whole rise of civilization in the Fertile Crescent, fascinates the hell out of me. When we stopped being hunters and gatherers and became agrarian. And it's a confluence of a lot of interesting things, which again gave the rise to, we don't have to keep on the move. We can actually put down roots here and develop a relatively stable social system. So those are the three elements that I have floating around. Literally, one day, I'm sitting in my bedroom, because I had a little desk in the corner back then. I lived in a little 2-bedroom apartment. And like the light bulb went on. I went, humans have been struggling to get civilized for the first 75,000 years, because every time they get too big for their britches, the fairies knock them on their ass until the Magi showed up and protected the humans. Boom. There was my world for fairy tale. At that point, I had to create a set of characters and a circumstance. And I thought, I don't want to do like a historical thing where we have battles with guys in bronze swords and things. A family in New York next to the fairies, and they're not nice neighbors, and the covenant between humans and fairies is broken. And suddenly I got a story. And sometimes the ideas are relatively abstracted until they all just sort of come together.
Do you think you'd ever come back to that universe?
Well, not that specific universe, I don't think. I could do quite a lot of the sort of ooh, golly whiz stuff with the character of Mark Blackman being sort of the concept. Obviously the twins remember what went on. But I think a direct one-off sequel, Return of the Fairies, I don't think so.
Okay.
I do have an idea for a contemporary dark fantasy, supernatural kind of thing that I've discussed with my editor, that once I finished, the 3 books that start with King of Ashes, once I finish The Legend of Firemane, I may do. It's called Elder Gods, and that's all I'm going to say about it. But it's got a lot of potential, I think, to be sort of in that same ballpark as fairy tale, in the sense of modern man, woman, child, modern society, confronted with supernatural in a way they're really unprepared to deal with. And then, I've talked to my editor about all kinds of things. I'd like to write a science fiction novel. Actually, I've got 2 ideas. And I went through years of my editor going, no, you write fantasy. That's where the money is, which is true. And she sort of surprised me, because the last time I was in London, we were having tea. And I said, someday I'd like to write a science fiction novel. And it was like, I've worked with the woman for 20 more than 20 years. Wonderful editor and publisher named Jane Johnson at HarperCollins. Also a very good writer, and has her own, list of titles. And she goes, "Oh well, I'd love, let's talk about it." I'm like, "We have. You kept saying no. You forgot all those previous discussions." I didn't say this. I was thinking it, but I might do. I'd like to do a big sort of Robert Heinlein-esque, a big space opera. I also got an alternate history thing in mind too. That both would be big, sprawling, generational kinds of stories. My ambition is to write 50 books and then stop and figure out what to do next. That's kind of my plan. So I'm working on, book 34 now, and 16 to go before I get to catch my breath. And then, I'm in my 70s. I figure, in 8 or 9 years I can start planning my retirement.
Well, you're loving what you're doing, obviously.
Well, I do. It's the best job I ever had. And I've gotten to do things that I never would have imagined. I've traveled all over the place. I've been to Singapore, South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, Western Europe, Brazil. Just met lovely people all around the world. Been gratified by the reception. I've got fans who are just glorious in their support. And who really treat me kindly. Nobody likes everything, so I do occasionally get, I learned early on. My father was a TV director, producer, writer. He did feature films before that. He started during the Depression, working at Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer. And I would hear him say things that came back to me years later. When I was a kid, I didn't really appreciate a lot of what my dad was saying, but it stuck, and my dad passed when I was 19, so I really hadn't quite gotten to that father-son place where you're dealing as adults. I was still the kid, but I remember him saying something about reviews. We were talking about a movie, got a really bad review, and a friend of his was very disappointed. You still there?
Oh yeah, I can hear you. Yep.
Oh, sorry, we're not seeing you. It's
I know.
hard.
It's like I'm listening. Yep.
Okay, but anyway, long story short, he said to me, "Look, if you believe the good reviews, you got to believe the bad ones too. It's better not to believe any of them." And I remembered that because the very first major review I ever got was in the Washington Post, and it was the entertainment editor, not the book editor. And there's a really long, boring story about how Doubleday solicited reviewers that I'll spare you. It's just they did it the worst possible way you could. And they sent out basically a bound photocopy of the manuscript rather than a galley. And so the entertainment editor, a lot of people don't know, back in the days, people would roll into the book review, the book, depending on how big the paper was, they either had one guy or two guys or maybe a rolling committee. Here in San Diego, for instance, they had one guy named Ed Hutchings who did all the main reviews. But he would farm out books to other people in the area to do reviews. Greg Bear, for instance, before he became famous, was doing reviews of other science fiction and fantasy because Ed wouldn't read that stuff, blah, blah, blah. I actually got to meet him later, and we actually became friendly because it turned out that as much as he didn't care about fantasy and science fiction, we cared a lot about the same stuff. He was a wine freak. I was a wine freak. We both loved the history of sports. So the point of it was that I had this review from the entertainment editor because the guy who ran the book review department, he went to the entertainment guy went to the book guy and said, "Hey, you really ought to review this." And he said, "I'm not going to read this piece of crap." He said, "If you like it so much, you write the review." So he did. I got a Saturday review, 2 columns on the front of the entertainment section of the Washington Post. My mother didn't like the book as much as this guy did. He sort of, on the blurb it says, not since Tolkien. Well, Feist may not only be the next Tolkien, he also may be Raphael Sabatini, which was great here because one of my favorite writers. And in his life, 4 other really great adventure writers, Sir Robert Louis Stevenson, Sir Walter Scott, mostly my influences as a kid. Wow, I'm something, aren't I? And then the next week, my editor's assistant sent me 2 clippings, one from the Charlotte Observer and one from the Atlanta Constitution, and they started off, both almost this, not word for word, but the same message. The blurb on the jacket says, "Not since Tolkien," and the Charlotte Observer editor said, "Well, Feist probably would have benefited if he'd stopped trying to be so much like Tolkien and concentrated more on an original voice." Whereas the other one said, Feist would have been benefited if he had tried to be more like Tolkien. And I looked at these two side by side, and then I remember what my dad said, and I went, okay, he's right. I watered up through him right. And I have almost never read a review of one of my books since then. People will send me links saying, now that, we're in blog heaven, or hell, depending on how you look at it. So-and-so reviewed Magician, going, okay, I don't need to go to a blog site and read some random guy's review, no matter how laudatory it may be, or damning as the case may be, on a book that was printed in 1982. It's found its readership. In other words, if it exposes people to the book who normally wouldn't be aware of it, because backlist is a bit of a problem. You get buried among all the newcomers. So as far as, them acquainting readership, that's great. Just like if people who watch your podcast, have never heard of me, maybe somebody will pick up a book and enjoy it, and that's great. But I don't need the strokes. I don't need somebody to tell me I did good. Because ultimately for a working pro, and this is something, you can pass on to your wife and anybody else who's, trying to break in, the ultimate test is, are you finding your readers? Are you selling? Are you doing enough to get people to wait for the next one and look forward to it? And I'm blessed because I managed to find a narrative in a story in a world that was generational. I'm writing about certain characters' grandchildren, 12 or 14 books in. And I grew up with James A. Michener, for instance, is one of my favorite writers. That's real generational stuff. Where the hero of the last 4 chapters is the great-grandson of the guy you meet in chapter 1. Edna Ferberwood did that kind of stuff, too. And, it sings to me. It has a sense of permanence that a lot of fiction is a little glimpse into a moment or a series of moments that cover a week or 10 days or, well, Magician covered a 12-year span. And that was just the first book. And I like that kind of stuff. So, having completely forgotten the original question that got me off on a tangent, I will throw it back to you.
I appreciate it. This is really good insight, and I know we don't have a lot of time left, but one of the things I did want to point out in your books is, like you said, it is generational, and every time there would be a new start, I wasn't sure I was going to really like these characters that you brought in. The Rue, the Eric, all of these different characters, Talon. And then you switch it around and then you say, oh, by the way, the villain from the last book, he's now your main character in this book with Casper. And I love that.
I had fun with that stuff. The reason is because, for one thing, no character who's dimensional goes through all this stuff without evolving and changing as a result of the behavior. Unless you're writing a book like Alfie, where the point of the narrative is, what's the crap that this guy goes through, and he doesn't learn a damn thing. Mm-hmm. Alfie, the original movie with Michael Caine and the novel it's based on, are brilliant. The remake is okay, but the first one, when he looks at the camera and says, and sometimes I just ask, what's it all about? The guy doesn't get anything, and that's what that story was about. But unless you're doing that, unless you're the characters have to grow and evolve. So my first sort of induced observation is that villains are the heroes of their own story. Hitler looked in the mirror, he saw a good guy and didn't understand why so many people objected to his life choices. He liked dogs, after all. Come on. He was a vegetarian, He painted, What was that line from the producers? 2 coats in one day. But, Harlan Ellison wrote a lovely story just on that motif called Hitler Painted Roses, about a guy who's condemned to hell. He's visiting and is doing some Dante-esque kind of thing. But he finds that Hitler's job is that, he's in the antechamber at the entrance hall painting glorious roses and other, pastoral images. Harlan's one of the most original voices ever, and I have nothing but respect for his ability to dream up stuff I can't even imagine. There's a lot of writers out there like that who I'm in awe of. But, we get back to the idea that there are no bad guys. It's all relative. It's a question of where you're standing. So I took a guy like Casper and I said, okay, well, he's a very interesting character. He's very, he's very Cesare Borgia was sort of my model for him. The Borgias were a fascinating crime family. They were the original Sopranos. And one of the things about that character was, well, he fell under the sway of a very evil magician who's, seedy, lasso baron, guy came and went and was in several books as a bad guy. And he had kind of antisocial tendencies going in, but he was really pushed in that direction by the evil influence. So, okay, let's redeem him in the third book. After King of Foxes, I went, okay, I don't know what to do with Talon anymore. Oh, shoot. So my 3-book story about Talon and what led him to the Conclave of Shadows was okay, it's 2 books. Well, I don't know. Let's find out what happens to Casper. So I wrote the scene at the end of the 2nd book where he's banished, where Talon forgives him. And I didn't preach on that. I let that, but my point buried in there was that forgiveness is not about absolving the other person. It's about letting go of stuff you don't need. So Talon is letting go of baggage by not killing Casper. Okay. And then Casper redeems himself. And suddenly I found a character that I really liked writing about. His scene with General Armin Borga down at when the war has stalled and he's trying to get to a place where he can get back home, and they're playing chess and talking, and he says, well, what do you suggest? Well, you marry the son of this guy off of the daughter of that guy, declare peace, and go home. Otherwise, you're just going to destroy both nations. It's like 2 pragmatists talking about life-altering events in a very practical way. The thing about Midkemia as an environment and being me writing historical novels about a place that doesn't exist, I've had people comment, they say, geez, you got a lot of politics in your fantasy. Well, yeah, because people are political. If you look at Tolkien, he had the races. He had the elves and the dwarves, and the humans. And so the alliance against Sauron, to a large degree, is more ethnic than it is political, though he does have, the riders of Rohan were different than the people in Gondor, and that sort of thing. But even then, it's still not as fine-grained as I liked. Because, I liked going to Great Kesh and seeing a very different culture than the kingdom. And I started that with Magician. In Magician, I did the first half of the book intentionally was a very traditional, from our point of view, sort of feudal-esque, Western, Northern European-esque, sort of Tolkien-esque in the sense that I had dwarves, even though my dwarves and elves were very different than his. But when Pug went to Kelowon and I dropped him in that swamp, I wanted his culture shock to be felt by the reader. I wanted the Sorani to be non-Western, so I grabbed Koreans, Japanese, a little bit of the Khmer Empire, though at the time I was reading that stuff, they hadn't discovered as much about the Khmer as they know now. Otherwise, the people who built Angkor Wat, which for up until like 25, 30 years ago, nobody knew who built Angkor Wat in Cambodia. Nobody knew who the Khmer really were. And then you find out that they had this empire that was just amazing. And same thing with the Hittites. Relatively speaking, for like hundreds of years, the Hittites were a vague reference in the Bible. And then somebody discovered their version of the Rosetta Stone, the thing that let them completely translate and get the history. And for us, the good thing was the Hittites were real good record keepers. They really, really were good about, and then this king, died, and his two brothers fought over the throne, and this one allied with Egypt, and, all that kind of stuff. It's fascinating. You cannot do societies without looking at their social norms and their political bents. It's too many fantasies are, okay, there's a king, and maybe there's a baron, or a duke and a baron, and a vicomte, or their knights, and, I love George's writing, but one of the things he chose to do was go in a very traditional way with rival kingdoms. And the concept of somebody wants to be high king. Somebody wants the Iron Throne, and that's fine. Because he does it brilliantly. But in a lot of ways, he cheats, and I congratulate him for cheating because he does it brilliantly. His cultures are very Renaissance. His technology is 13th century, but he has big, heavy industrial relationships and trade and stuff, and the Iron Isles are disadvantaged because they don't have a lot of natural resources, whereas Dorne is exporting stuff right, left, and center, and richer than Croesus. That kind of stuff. For a writer, the rule is you got to sell it. If you can sell it, it doesn't matter. If you can't sell it, you're dead. And George sells it. I've been a fan of George since I read Armageddon Rag. I have a first edition autographed of Armageddon Rag from George R. R. Martin, which is one of my special, never going to sell books. It's about exploring the human condition, even in a fantasy setting like Mechemia. That was a very long answer. Sorry.
I love that. And I know we are out of time because I want to really respect the time you've given me because I've really enjoyed this. But I wanted to just let everybody know that not only do you have your books that have been in print, like you've talked for over 30 years, some of your works have been put into comics. Marvel has adapted those, which to me is just amazing how they could do that.
Well, Marvel inherited. That's another long story. The original publisher, DB Pro, had some really nice guys, very earnest, had no clue how to run the business, and ended up owing Marvel a great deal of money. And to settle the distribution problem, they basically just handed the titles to Marvel. The truth is, Marvel didn't really care that they had my stuff. They really wanted the Anita Baker stuff. That was, Raiders of the Ark meets vampires, basically.
Yep.
And they really wanted that stuff. Lowell Hamilton had a very good overlapping audience with comic readers. So they published my stuff, and in fact, they never finished it in terms of print. I got a really nice, I was laughing, and I called my agent at the time, and read it to him, and he was laughing with me, where Marvel was proud to announce that I was the first writer who they had picked to go digital only. Which was, okay, see, we paid for the writer and the artist, but we're not going to print the damn thing and ship it. We're just going to put it up on the website and people can go find it. But it was an honor. It's just like, we're going to give you the honor of taking this bomb to the wall of the city and putting it in front of the gate while we light the fuse over here. And we hope that you really can run fast. What is that wonderful line from Ben Franklin? Talking about the colonists. He says, calling us Englishmen is like calling a steer a bull. He's thankful for the honor, but he would rather have restored to him what was rightfully.
Very true. I did not know that because our podcast has a lot of comic book fans, so that is another a gateway into your work. If they'd rather have pictures with the words, but I thought that was kind of interesting because a book is 400 pages long, but a comic is typically 22 pages. So
but the thing is, it's Magician. I want to say 48 issues, I think. So
yeah,
it's it's there. And some of the art is really good. Some of the art is okay. The adaptation is fairly straightforward. If I had been adapting it, we'd still be waiting for the first script, I think, because just cutting things out is always difficult. It's who said it? I'm having a senior moment here. A very famous writer who I'll remember 10 minutes from now said, don't be afraid to kill your darlings. And by that, you've got to know what to let go of. I have cut stuff that I bled on the typewriter, metaphorically speaking, to get that stuff and finally looked at it and no, it doesn't work, get rid of it. And all of that is of a piece, which is that the writer's job primarily is to entertain. I've had people write me letters and say some amazing things that were terribly unexpected about how they read something and it changed how they looked at a situation and they made a life change because of that. I had one kid who told me that he was considering suicide and he read something I wrote and said, okay, this is stupid, and he turned his life around. Okay. And I am a firm believer that person would have found something else if not my work. But my work happened to be the catalyst. But I've never set out to change people's worldview or create life-altering opportunities. I've just set out to entertain. I just want to be considered a good yarn spinner. And if, I have no ambition to be considered the greatest this or the greatest that. Like I said, there are writers out there that I'm in awe of. Just Jonathan Carroll, W.P. Kinsella, Tim Powers. These are guys who thought up stuff where I'm going, okay, in a million years, I never would have dreamed that up. It's brilliant. And I love that. I love the fact that there are people out there with entirely different voices that allow me to be as captivated as if I was that kid in high school reading Hal Clement's Cycle of Fire, Eric Frank Russell's Wasp, the early Heinlein Juveniles, Andre Norton's stuff. Oh, man, I love her stuff. And that's the object of the exercise, nothing more.
And that takes me to the moment that I truly became the biggest fan of yours, because I never felt the way a character felt until when Pug, trapped on that alien world, finally realized his powers, and they just rose within them. When I just read that, that line, that moment, it just, a book had never had that effect on me before, and I thank you for that moment.
That was so much fun, I did it twice. Because, in Servant of the Empire, Ma was in the audience watching him do that. I got to tell you, I've had a lot of fun in this business.
Well, we're thankful for you. And to bring this back full circle, your games are also still available on Good Old Games. They are the greatest folks in the world because they allow your digital darlings in video games to still exist, where a lot of times they just go away.
I'm not seeing a dime out of that.
Oh, that sucks. Now,
it's what they call it's what they call abandonware. It's the fact that you need a DOS box basically. Yeah. Again, I could do a half hour just on my business relationships with Sierra Online and how I started off with other companies and both games ended up with Sierra. By the way, those games are now technically owned by Blizzard.
That's crazy.
Yeah, they're in a box somewhere. Yeah, they're in a box in a warehouse. They will never see the light of day again. So people should enjoy them. But in my view of things, it's like, okay, speaking of Blizzard, I have a guild that I put together on the Proudmoore server that anybody who's listening to this and wants to run an alliance to. The guild is called Rotten Kids, named after my children. And I'm having a blast because I'm running with my kids. My kids no longer live with me. My daughter's in Northern California and my son's back east. But it's a way we can log on together and do stuff. So I love the virtual world aspect of social networking. And, it allows me to reach out. And I guess I'm sort of also getting some new readers as a result of this, which is always welcome. But the reason I'm saying yes to podcasts like yours, and this has been great fun, is because, there's a whole new generation of readers out there where Magician would be a brand new book. People ask me, people my age or below, people who've seen my work on the shelves over the last 20, 30 years, they'll say things like, well, how does it feel to be this successful? And I say, straight face, I am one of the most successful fantasy writers in the English-speaking world, which means 320 million Americans have never heard of me. It's a real small pond I swim in. And I never take it for granted. And I never, for a moment, expect anybody to know who I am when I'm introduced. Once in a while, I get surprised. I flew in from Heathrow about 5-6 years ago. And the guy looked at my passport and said, "Are you the writer?" And I went, "Oh, my God, he's heard of me. Wow." But I never expect it, and I'm always gratified when I can find a way to reach new potential readers. So thank you for the opportunity.
I appreciate this. My son is 11 now. He's really getting into reading. He loves Brandon Sanderson. So, you think about the next generation of authors coming up and the broad strokes that he does in his work. And when he gets a little bit older, I'd like to introduce him to your works because I think it's not got the gore and the disgust of George's books, but I think it's still adding the complexity, the character strains that really capture your imagination.
It depends on the kid. I've had a couple as young as 9, write me fan mail saying, "Hey, my dad said try this and it's great." You know your kids better than anybody, or you should at least. And my kids, I got married late. I had kids late. I'm 50 years older than my son, my youngest. And so watching the digital reality that he grew up in, my kids for a while thought I was joking when I said we didn't have a TV in my house till I was 7. I tried to explain party lines and landlines on the telephone. When it's like rotary dialing and calling the long distance operator to say I need to call outside the area, and she places the call for you. That stuff. I was old enough, or I am old enough, that I remember listening to radio drama. I remember listening to Gunsmoke on the radio before the TV show was launched. I remember Little Orphan Annie, for heaven's sakes. It's just watching the evolution of communication. I get the fact that it's a different reality out there in terms of entertainment choices. The kids today have 100 times more choices than I ever had, and yet I'm still getting new readers, and I am profoundly thankful for that.
Technology is an awesome thing. That's why we started this podcast. My friend and I are graduates of Michigan State, and we live states away, but this was our way to continue to talk about the things we loved and keep ourselves together, and also just to create a audio version of my personality for my son, so when he goes, 30 years later, my dad wasn't always an old dude.
I'd say you're just an old dude, but you might be hipper.
That's true. Yeah, a little more relevant at the time.
I am constantly amazed at the fact that my kids keep me on my toes.
Well, I want to thank you, Raymond. But as always, I want my reader and my listeners to know where they can find you. Best way to keep up with, what you're up to, and also what's coming next.
Well, right now, social media, I don't do Twitter very often. I probably should do more, but it scares me. Trying to condense things down to 140 characters, I go, probably going to be wrong. Certainly, I see lots of examples of that every day, given our American politics. I'm pretty active on Facebook. I'm usually in there every day answering stuff. So I have 2 pages. I have one where I've got the spiky hairdo. It's an older picture, and my tan. That's my personal page. That's the one where we yell at each other about politics and about sports, and who's got the better taste in whiskey, and what kind of coffee to have in the morning, and all the mundane things. And then my pro page, where I have on my black jacket, is the one where I try to limit my behavior to metaphorically keeping my pants on in public. I don't get into politics there anymore. It took me a while, and I realized, no, I've got to take the pro page and just go, this is for people who just want to know what I'm doing professionally. And the one exception to that lately was I did point out I was starting this guild in World of Warcraft, on Proudmoore. And if anybody in Britain, European people have to have an American account. If any of your players or any of your listeners are Warcraft players in Europe, that's something they should know. Anyway, I did shill that just because I wanted a fun place for my kids to go. Even though they're 25 and 22, still, I wanted a good experience. And my kids are having a blast. We're having more fun with this guild, with these people. A bunch of grown-ups in WoW. And it's lovely to play that game. So they can find me playing World of Warcraft a lot. I tend to get on chat sometimes too long. And instead of working, I tend to be yakking with my guildies. And then Facebook. I have a website that's more archival now. It's called cryd.com. And it's if you want to see the discussion on the order of reading, or you want to see what foreign publishers' book covers look like, and that's where you find all that stuff. But, I try to answer every question I can on Facebook. And, I figure we're all going to end up working for Mark Zuckerberg sooner or later. So.
And looks like in 2018, King of Ashes will debut. Is that still accurate?
God, I hope so. No, it was supposed to come out fall this year, but I screwed the pooch. This was absolutely my fault. I got a really, difficult time explaining to people because there's a lot of things that happened in my life personally that I'm not going to go into. The people who were involved know who they are, and they know what happened. But a combination of starting a new series and some family issues and some personal problems that weren't directly involved with my family but involved me conspired to really knock me on my butt. And I didn't so much suffer from writer's block as much as I suffered from a lot of uncertainty. If I had done another Nikemian novel, I don't think we'd be having that part of this discussion because it was just a real perfect storm of crap that it derailed me for about 3 years. And my publisher was incredibly patient and worked with me. And I actually liked the book that I finally came up with. I hope my readers like it too. If not, I may be selling cars next month. But we missed it was going to be a fall book this year, and we missed that. So it's going to be a spring book in May. So, 11 months from now. And hopefully by the time that's published, I will have already turned in book 2 and be working on book 3. I'd like to get this trilogy put paid to. This is more a traditional 3-act play. This is not going to be the beginning of this endless series, simply because I just don't have that kind of detail in the world. But yeah, so next year, in your local bookstores, in Amazon, wherever, King of Ashes, Volume 1 and the Legend of Fire Maid.
Excellent. Well, once again, thank you very much. Listeners, obviously you've been listening to the Secret Friends Unite podcast. Follow us on Twitter at Secret Friends U. We have a YouTube channel, and we also have a Facebook podcast group as well. We also have secretfriendsunite@gmail.com if you want to send an email and ask, George. We talked about George a lot. Raymond, any questions as well, and I can make sure he gets those as well.
Hey, George is shorter. Okay, he wears those funny hats.
That's right.
And makes a hell of a lot more money than I do these days. So,
Well, we'll get you your next TV deal ready to go.
Well, I've been talking to film and TV people since 1985. Still waiting for that right deal. I work in the business, so I unlike a lot of writers who know nothing about Hollywood, I said no to a lot of pitches. Somebody said, what about Hollywood? What about film? I said, I get a lot of really nice lunches in West LA. I get taken to a lot of nice restaurants where people try to convince me to sign really stupid agreements. Never going to happen, folks.
Well, I honestly would love to see maybe even an app game coming out with your characters, because I think there's a lot to be done there. It's all out there. The potential is immense. And I'm certainly not going to say no to smart people with the right business model. We're doing it. People who want to take advantage, not so much. Well, thank you very much for listening, folks. Thank you very much. Thank you, Raymond. Have a great day.
My pleasure. You too.
Secret Friends Unite!